Participation at the last week's meeting. It was recorded, and this meeting will also be recorded, and both copies of the recordings will be available. Before we start, we will have a quick presentation, and then after that, we'll have ample time for questions and answers. There we have our little raised hand feature, which is located in the under your participation section. You'll see a little blue hand you can raise. We'll go over that right before questions and answers. And then let's go ahead and start. So next slide, please. So my name is Keith Greer. I'm a principal planner in the SANDAG's Regional Planning Agency. And thank you for taking time. I know this is hope to find you well in your living rooms or where you're out watching this. I wish we could all do this in person, and sometime in the future, hopefully when the pandemic ends, we'll be able to. So after a brief introduction of the run of the show to me today, I'm going to turn it over for some remarks by our Executive Director, Hassan Akrada. He'd like to provide a couple of welcoming remarks to you. Then we'll have Kim Smith, our SANDAG Environmental Program Manager, will give a short presentation on the project. We'll have ample time to answer questions and discuss the project. Again, this meeting is being recorded, and that recording will be made available. So in addition to myself tonight, let's see, we will have, next slide. In addition to myself, Hassan Akrada and Kim Smith, we'll also have representatives from Caltrans. I'm looking at right now, and we have Mr. Alan Kossa from Caltrans. We're hoping Mr. Bruce April, who's the Deputy Director of Right-of-Way, will be here, and Mr. Chris Schmidt, who's the Deputy Director of Right-of-Way as well. So what we hope to do tonight, our goal is to address the why, what, and how of this project. Why was the property acquired? What action is being proposed by SANDAG Board of Directors? And how SANDAG will propose to protect the property's unique features while allowing for future public access to occur. We'll dive into that presentation shortly, but first let me turn the presentation over to Hassan Akrada for a few remarks. Hassan?
Thank you, Keith, and good evening to all of you. Thank you for attending this meeting. My name is Hassan Akrada. I'm the Executive Director of SANDAG. Last week, we held the first community meeting to discuss the future of Rancho Lilac property. Unfortunately, the meeting was compromised, and we did not have a chance to hear from everyone that was first in attendance. And so we're here tonight to give the community another opportunity to ask questions, debate the issues. As part of our regional sustainable community strategy, we are committed to preserving open space for San Diegans to enjoy. To assist with the goals, SANDAG Transnet Environmental Mitigation Program has acquired over 8,780 acres, 5 times the size of Balboa Park, within the region to conserve the environment while responsibly delivering critical transportation infrastructure. The 902-acre ranch is an example of this proactive effort. The property was acquired with Transnet funds by Caltrans, and now we're transferring the property to a qualified land manager for perpetual management. Last meeting, we discussed what have changed since we went to the board last time. Obviously, we heard clearly from our board at the last meeting. What changed is SANDAG, through the negotiation with the winning bidder, will obtain an easement for future trail construction. And that's a big change, and that's in response to the community question. I received many emails, and I appreciate your participation and your writing and your taking time from your busy schedules to let us know how you feel. Obviously, the emails that we received will go to the board for their October 23rd meeting. It's going to be a closed session meeting followed by open session later. I just want you to know that we hear you. We understand the issues. But we also want you to know that whatever we're going to do is going to be based in the best use of this property. Obviously, the final say in this is the board of directors. So today, I'm going to turn it right now to Kim Smith, who gave you a presentation last time. We'll give you a presentation again, and then we'll open it up for question and answers, and hope by the end of the meeting, you'll have all of your questions answered. So with that, Kim.
Thank you. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Hassan. I'm going to start the presentation with a little bit about the background of the property and how we got to where we are tonight. So this is the Rancho Lilac property that we're here to discuss. It's a 902-acre property located in the community of Valley Center within the county of San Diego. Next slide, please. So while Rancho Lilac was historically used as a cattle farm, it still retains abundant wildlife habitat and endangered species, as well as historic and prehistoric resources. The property contains more than a dozen different sensitive vegetation communities, including coastal sage scrub and riparian forest. Keys Creek, which traverses the property, is an important east-west connector for wildlife, linking the foothills to the San Luis Rey River Valley. In addition, it is also home to many sensitive species anticipated for coverage in the Draft North County Multiple Species Conservation Program. The property is also of historical significance. In addition to several archaeological resources, a number of historic buildings and structures that require permanent preservation by the state of California are present on the property. These resources are directly associated with some past owners who were prominent figures in the San Diego region, including UN Ambassador Irving Solomon, who hosted world leaders at the ranch, including President Dwight Eisenhower and India leader Mahatma Gandhi, further contributing to the property's rich cultural history. Next slide, please. So why was the property acquired? Well, it was acquired by Caltrans in October of 2011 as net benefit biological mitigation required under the Transnet Ordinance for the State Route 76 highway improvement projects. As shown on the map above, it was part of a larger package of conservation, restoration, and infrastructure projects along the San Luis Rey River Valley that resulted in an environmental net benefit compared to typical mitigation, which seeks to only offset impacts. The acquisition of the property was 100% funded by the Transnet Environmental Mitigation Program. Funding from the Environmental Mitigation Program can only be used for the acquisition, restoration, and management of property acquired for the mitigation of regional and local transportation projects. Next slide, please. So what are the roles of Caltrans and SANDAGs related to this property? Well, first, Caltrans' role. So Caltrans acquired and currently owns and manages the property. As previously mentioned, it was purchased for mitigation for the State Route 76 highway widening projects. And Caltrans is seeking to transfer the property to a qualified land manager to manage in perpetuity. So what is SANDAG's role? They provided funding through the Transnet Environmental Mitigation Program for the acquisition of Rancho Lilac. We will be providing funding in the form of an endowment for perpetual management of the property. And we are SANDAG is the contracting lead for the RFP for land management. Next slide, please. So why has the RFP taken so long? So the slide above shows the RFP process and the status. Beginning with the acquisition of the property in 2011 by Caltrans, shown on your left. In 2014, the SANDAG board authorized release of the RFP. And then in 2016, the release of the RFP went to the public and SANDAG received 3 proposals. In 2017, the San Diego Habitat Conservancy was selected for negotiations. And then from 2017 to 2020, during negotiations of the endowment with San Diego Habitat Conservancy, several issues had to be resolved by Caltrans before they could transfer the property. First, Caltrans had to evaluate the potential for historic and prehistoric resources on site. They also conducted lead abatement and asbestos removal on many of the historic buildings, in addition to weed abatement, waste removal, and tenant management. This led to the SANDAG board meeting on May 22nd, where the board of directors was asked to approve that the executive director execute an agreement for the transfer and long-term management of the property. Next slide, please. Requirements of the RFP included both land and fiscal management experience. The San Diego Habitat Conservancy met those requirements. Specifically, founded in 2000, the San Diego Habitat Conservancy is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. They are a qualified land manager in San Diego County pursuant to CDFW qualifications to hold and manage mitigation lands in regions 5 and 6 pursuant to Senate Bill 1094. They currently manage 31 open space preserves totaling over 1,800 acres. In addition, 5 preserves totaling 600 acres are currently under contract. In addition, SDHC was granted accreditation by the Land Trust Accreditation Commission, and they are the only accredited land trust headquartered in San Diego County. Next slide, please. So once the property is transferred and the endowment is placed, the selected land manager is required to develop and implement a draft habitat management plan within 18 months of transfer. The HMP will be used to guide the use and management of the property to maintain populations of listed species, protect and restore sensitive habitats, protect historical and cultural resources and other open space values, and maintain water quality. Contents of the HMP include, well, first they need to establish the existing baseline conditions for biological resources, cultural resources, exotic plants, what they are going to do with property management, security, and community relations, agricultural operations, facility and tenants, water rights and irrigation, water pollution, and hazardous waste. The land manager must tell us what their plans, goals, and objectives are, their management strategies and actions, the monitoring program, and a detailed implementation plan, schedule, and cost. So I'd like to go back to under community relations. The RFP required that a community relations strategy be prepared that included direct outreach to neighbors surrounding the property and the broader community of Valley Center. SDHC's proposal included specific language shown above regarding trails, specifically that the Valley Center Trails Association would be consulted regarding the feasibility of creating a multi-use trail through the property in accordance with the County of San Diego General Plan Trail Element, which shows a trail running east to west through the Rancho Lilac property. The RFP, however, did not include the construction or maintenance of trails as a requirement of the proposal. Once the HMP is completed, the land manager will provide a draft to SANDAG and Caltrans to review, who will solicit comments from the outside organizations, including the resource agencies. Next slide, please. At the May 22nd Board of Directors meeting, members of the public brought up concerns that the transfer of the property from Caltrans to a private entity would preclude future public access and trails within Rancho Lilac. Historically and currently, there is no formal public access or trails on the property. The county general plan shown above shows plans for future trails running north-south along Lilac Road and east-west across the center of the property. It is also our understanding that Valley Center is currently going through an update to their community plan, which would also include a plan for trails. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Keith Greer to discuss staff's recommended approach. Keith?
Thanks, Kim. So we have this really unique property. It has all these special biological, historical, and prehistoric resources on the property. And we need to make sure that those resources are protected because that's why the property was purchased. At the same time, we want to make sure that we can accommodate future trails. So how can this be done? Next slide. So here's our recommended approach that went to the Board of Directors on May 22nd. It first starts with this transfer of the state property, because again, this is Caltrans owned state property, to a third party. That's done through Caltrans and their work with the California Transportation Commission. In order for the California Transportation Commission to transfer that property, they need to make sure that it's protected and preserved in perpetuity. That's where, as part of the proposal, a conservation easement will be placed on the property, which would protect those historic, biological, and cultural resources, at the same time that the SANDAG prepares and puts an endowment with a third party. So the endowments for the perpetual management of the property, the conservation easement makes sure the property is protected in perpetuity. So then a period of time comes where the contractor, in this case, the owner of the lot property proposes San Diego Habitat Conservancy, has a period of 18 months to prepare what's known as a habitat management plan. And Kim went over the elements of what's in an HMP. That habitat management plan, to be clear, will also show future potential trail configurations on the property. And it will involve County of San Diego and any other public input. So there's a process that will be going forward as preparations of the HMP is prepared. Finally, SANDAG and Caltrans would final approval over the HMP pursuant to the contract that we'd enter into with the San Diego Habitat Conservancy. So we heard that there's a fear or concern that if the property transfers outside of government control, that future potential access would be lost. So we worked with struggle with that first, and we said, well, how do we actually create that additional assurances? So we worked with with outside counsel, two individuals who actually were former County of San Diego counsels to the Park and Recreation Department. And they proposed a solution that we actually are presenting tonight. And that's, in addition to a conservation easement, providing additional assurances, which include trail access easement that would go to SANDAG. So SANDAG would have the ability and the right to build a trail, but not the obligations to build it. In addition, SANDAG would offer a 5-year exclusivity agreement to the County of San Diego for the planning, design, and construction, or environmental clearance of that trail. That gives the county time and space to work with the Valley Center Community Plan to figure out not only where the trails should go on this property, but where should the connections go outside this property in the larger Valley Center Community Plan. They would then prepare the design and environmental clearance of the trail. And finally, in conjunction with the clearance of the trail from the county and the development of the habitat management plan, that trail access easement that's given to SANDAG would be allowed to be transferred to the County of San Diego. That's our proposal tonight, and we want to hear what your thoughts are on that proposal. But before we do, and I know you probably have a lot of specific questions on the easement and what we can address in a minute, but let me just outline the next steps. Next slide. So our next steps, we are developing a staff report, and it's based upon the proposal that I've just outlined. And with your input, we want to see if that proposal can be modified, added to, see what ultimately will go to the SANDAG board in open session. There's also a board meeting this Friday, October 23rd at 9 a.m. in closed session. And you may ask, why a closed session? The action is at heart a real estate issue, the establishment of an endowment for the acceptance of a conservation and trail easement. The SANDAG board wants a chance to meet with their attorneys to understand the legal, contractual, and real property aspects of the proposal and all their options prior to bringing this back in open session and taking action. So based upon direction from the board, SANDAG staff will bring this item back to an open session later on in November or December as directed for the approval of the land management contract or considerations thereof. Next slide. So that concludes the presentation this evening. We'll have ample time to ask those questions and answers. I thank you for allowing us this opportunity to present what I hope is a clear and logical pathway for moving forward with this project, providing both assurances for conservation of resources and allowing future public access. And again, currently there's no public access. There's no enhancement of the biological resources or historic resources on the property. There's no opportunity for education of school kids, and there's minimal effort to maintain the property. We'd like to see that changed. And that starts with a timely transfer of the property from the state. So I believe the proposed easements and agreements provide a pathway to move us forward. And I'm hoping we have your input tonight to figure out how we make this, craft this proposal. Before we move to public comment, I would like to give the opportunity for the San Diego Habitat Conservancy and the County of San Diego Park and Recreation to address the public. First, Mr. Don Scholes, the San Diego Habitat Conservancy, would you like to make a statement about the future trails on the property and about SDHC's proposal?
Sure, thanks, Keith. I wanted to expand on a few items that had been alluded to in the past last couple of meetings, and wanted to have an opportunity to expand upon those comments and maybe provide a little bit of background about us and our vision for Rancho Lilac. As it was mentioned, I believe in the last meeting, we were founded in 2000. We have 31 open space preserves throughout San Diego County that total over about 1,850 acres. We have 5 additional preserves that are under contract that we're just waiting for the mitigation commitments to be met, and we'll start management on those. And those 5 additional preserves total over another 660 acres. We also have pending projects, and those are somewhat up in the future for sure. But I did want to note that we do have one pending project that is over 7,400 acres in size. That'll be a mitigation bank for the desert tortoise. All of our preserves are managed for the long-term conservation enhancement of existing biological and environmental resources in perpetuity. That's forever. SDHC is approved by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to hold and manage mitigation lands. In February 2016, we were also granted accreditation by the Land Trust Accreditation Committee, an independent program of the National Land Trust Alliance, That accreditation is a market distinction and an assurance awarded to land trusts that meet high standards for land conservation. We are the only LTA accredited land trust that's headquartered in San Diego County. Under this scenario, the endowment would be held by the San Diego Foundation. The San Diego Foundation is approved, is an approved endowment holder under Senate Bill 1094, and we're an approved easement holder and manager under Senate Bill 1094. We operate, all our budgeted money is managed according to generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP, and we perform financial audits of the Conservancy. I think it should be noted that besides our land management qualifications and financial assurances, I believe one of the reasons why we were the preferred bidder for the project was because of to work with the Valley Center community. Our vision for the management of Rancho Lilac, I can briefly touch upon it. More of it will be expanded upon when the habitat management plan is prepared. But the overall goal of the management of the environmental and historic resources at Rancho Lilac is to preserve the existing environmental resources, their current condition, and improve those conditions over time. It's also, let me back up just a second. So regarding the habitat management, Rancho Lilac certainly has been alluded to, represents a valuable intact block of habitat, and it has a mosaic of more than a dozen different habitat types. It supports many species that are included in the Multiple Species Conservation Program, MSCP. We manage all of those habitat types and all of those sensitive species on our other preserves throughout the county. As Kim mentioned, as part of the preparation, we certainly would be preparing baseline surveys to establish those existing conditions, and then everything in the management plan goes back to what are the existing conditions, and that helps to determine what future uses and how those uses would be determined. All the monitoring that of the resources would be consistent with the San Diego Management Monitoring Program, the SDMMP, and the Monitoring Strategic Plan, or MSP. We do envision habitat restoration in the riparian and upland habitats. Some restoration is included with the initial budget, and then other restoration activities, we would be seeking grants to supplement those funds to do additional restoration. For historic resources management, Rancho Lilac is eligible for the Register of Historic Places based on 4 aspects. It's the original homestead of William Keyes, of which Keyes Creek is named after. Rancho Lilac served as the center of the Lilac community for many years. It had the one-room schoolhouse and the post office. It was owned by Colonel Irving Solomon, ambassador to the UN, and had many famous visitors, including dignitaries and celebrities. And it's also important because of its historic built environment and prehistoric sites that are comprised of 29 historic structures, 4 historic archaeological sites, and 16 prehistoric sites. The historic architect on our team will first be surveying and documenting each building and resource to prepare guidance and architectural documents for the long-term preservation of those historic features, and preparing appropriate documentation to qualify Rancho Lilac for the historic register. They will be preparing documents and obtaining permits for repair, rehabilitation, and restoration of the historic structures that our historic contractor will be performing. Work on site will range and span from stabilization, mothballing, preservation, and rehabilitation. Each of those sort of have different designations as far as a minimum of stabilizing a building to rehabilitating it for full use. Other repair work on infrastructure will also be performed. I did want to note, and it's just kind of a interesting aside, and Hassan had mentioned some of the famous visitors on site, but certainly Eleanor Roosevelt was a close family friend of the Solomons. Golda Meir visited, Dwight Eisenhower, Mahatma Gandhi, and Ralph Bunche. Celebrities included Myrna Loy, who worked with Colonel Solomon at the UN, Ramon Navarro, who was a movie star of his day and lived in Valley Center, as well as Jack Haley, who was the Tin Man in the Wizard of Oz. Of particular note is Ralph Bunche, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1950 for his mediation of a peace agreement between Israel and Egypt. It's almost certain that he wrote some of the legislation for that agreement at Rancho Lilac with Colonel Solomon. As mentioned, we look forward to, and it was a big part of our proposal, and what we see as an important part of our management plan is we see outreach and education as a key component of that management plan's success. Outreach and education will be integral in promoting Rancho Lilac's rich environmental and cultural history. It is an important piece of management to develop assistance and stewardship advocates that will further benefit the conservation values of Rancho Lilac.
Thank you, Don. I think
Thanks.
if you're going to stay on, we can probably have some questions directed towards you, if that's okay.
Okay.
I'd like to ask Ms. Deb Mosley from the County of San Diego Park and Recreation if she'd like to provide any input to the public as well. Deb?
Hi, thank you very much, Keith. And I appreciate that to be here tonight and have another opportunity to talk a little bit about, Rancho Lilac and the county's involvement. As Kim and Keith and Don mentioned, the Rancho Lilac property is very rich in biological and cultural and historical resources. And as part of the EMP, it is very important for the preservation of this property. It is already conserved. And so really this is to transfer ownership to a land management in perpetuity. And as Keith has mentioned, it would be under an easement. And so therefore the preservation is integral, and the most important thing about this property, depending on whoever ends up managing the property. And so I just wanted to kind of convey that the county's role in this at this time, and we've been very supportive as a regional leader in working with SANDAG and with the community when we heard some of the concerns related to the public access component. As majority of you know, we own and manage 53,000 acres of parkland, majority of which is preserved land. We have a dual purpose mission, which is to provide exceptional park and recreational experience, but also preserving significant natural resources. And we also work with a lot of nonprofits and manage a lot of our own historical sites. And so we definitely understand the value of this property. We do manage 370 miles of trails in the county. We have a trails master plan that has some planned trails in this area as well. And so we definitely agree this 900-acre site has the opportunity to be preserved and should be preserved for its resources, but also that there is an opportunity for an appropriate amount of trails that could be put onto the property, passive recreation that would not have an impact to the resources. We also note that there are a lot of existing trails on the property, and so we think that that could be achieved in such a way without having an impact to the resources. The approach that Keith and Kim have unveiled, I think, is an attempt to listen to the community, and it would provide trail easements on the property and potential trail connections off-site. With the Conservancy, my understanding is they would work on a habitat management plan with the public and also work with the county. And we would work with them where feasible to identify where existing trails on the property and potentially any new opportunities would be best while balancing that preservation. The issue, and Keith has mentioned this, is funding. And so we, it was stated that the easements would be given to the county as an exclusive right to take on the trail easements. And it's really, that's something that the county doesn't have funding for yet. We would have to go to our board and request funding. And there are a lot of other conflicting priorities. So we just want to make sure that that is understood, that we cannot guarantee that if we did take on the easements that we would have the funding or even the support by our board to go ahead and be able to do the improvements on the trails. I mentioned this at the last public meeting, and I think that there's been a little bit of some misinformation, so I wanted to bring it up again. The county did submit a proposal also to take on the property and be the land manager with the same conditions that the Conservancy would be under, that this would be above and beyond mitigation. It would be conserved land in perpetuity. It would have an easement on the property, and then there would be a minimal amount of trails. I've seen a few emails going around that there was some concern that this was property that was going to be solely developed and trails all over. And so I just wanted to clarify that if the county, if the SANDAG board did choose to not go with the Conservancy, and I know there was a lot of decisions, this is up to the board, and it came to the county that there would not be any plan. We could not overdevelop the site as it is conserved land and there is an easement and it's part of the EMP program. So there's restrictions for that. So I appreciate everybody's time, and that was just kind of a little bit of summary in terms of the county's role. And I am here also, Keith, I'll stay for the whole meeting if there are any county specific questions.
Thank you very much, Deb. Appreciate it. Well, we have an ample time to answer your questions. We have over an hour. I think Deb mentioned this and Don alluded to it as well. The property is conserved. That's good news. It will be protected in the future. And now we're looking at how to move forward with land management. So this is an opportunity for us to do some questions and answers. What we do is we will use that raised hand feature in the Zoom meeting. And as soon as you have a raised hand, Kim Smith will help facilitate calling on the individuals. Our production crew, Kendall, will help to allow the opportunity then to unmute yourself, ask your question. We'll be able to answer it. Don't feel like you have to ask all your questions at once. We'll have second round, third round if you want to, until you're exhausted and we're exhausted. But again, this meeting is recorded. We will make that recording available to you. So Kim, why don't we start off with the first questions?
Okay, so our first person on the list is Ben Mills.
Hi, Ben.
Hi, Keith. This is Ben Mills with Supervisor Desmond's office. I want to first thank SANDAG and all staff for facilitating not only this meeting, but the previous meetings that you facilitated as well. And I also want to thank Deb Mosley and the rest of our Department of Parks and Recreation for representing the county on this. I did want to mention one thing, and Deb did a great job explaining the process and procedures, but one thing that I would like to provide is the opinion of the supervisor's office. And that is, as Deb mentioned, District 5 has many priorities, many priorities in which we are trying to fund recreational opportunities for everybody. Typically, how we fund recreational opportunities is by acquiring additional land for either preserve management or ownership. And because of that, we receive credit. We receive credit in the form of state and federal requirements as far as the Climate Action Plan, as far as the Multiple Species Conservation Plan, and as part of our general plan policy requirements for open space attainment. Because this preserve is potentially going to go to the San Diego Habitat Conservancy, the county wouldn't receive those credits, which are required by state and federal requirements. They're not guaranteed. And for that reason, it makes it difficult for the county to fund trails because we don't get those credits that we need. It's not a prudent use of our taxpayer dollars. It's our opinion that taxpayer dollars used to acquire preserves should be open to the public. Preserves that are acquired by taxpayer money should be open to the public. And it's for that reason we, Supervisor Desmond's office and myself are advocating to continue to tell the public if trails are of the utmost importance, which we understand they are in this case, then really the county needs to potentially be the preserve manager to get the credits, to use the money, taxpayer money, to open up the park and receive the credits of that. I'll also be available for the entire meeting if anybody has any questions for me. And again, thank you, Keith. Thank you, SANDAG. Thank you, Deb. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben. Just as a point of clarification, what Ben's talking about credits, he's talking about the conservation of land for future multiple species conservation program. That's the North County Multiple Species Conservation Program, which has not been adopted. And for the climate action plans, which again is the future climate action plan because there's no adopted plan. So again, this land is already conserved. So the credit, I'm not sure who gets the credit for conserved land. We always call it baseline conditions. So if there's credit to be had, you know, that's above and beyond what's already conserved out there. That said, I think the issue of funding is still an outstanding issue. To be clear, SANDAG is not proposing, nor is San Diego Habitat Conservancy proposing to fund the trails under this proposal. And we're trying to figure out how we go forward with still providing the access assurances in the future, but we're not guaranteeing the funding at this point. So both Deb and Ben was very clear on that point, and I want to make sure that public understood that. Kim, next person.
Okay, the next person is Pam Wiedenkeller.
Thank you for taking my question. I just want to make sure I understand this completely. The trail easement does need to be funded by someone other than SANDAG and other than San Diego Habitat for Conservancy. But from what I just heard, the county is reluctant to do it if they don't get the rest of the incentives that go with the land. Am I understanding that correctly? That basically the county won't be able to build those trails within 5 years. So there is no guarantee that we will have trails in an appropriate place on that beautiful property.
So I think to answer your question is that the proposal in front of the board, going forward to the board, would be to deal with the issue of how do you guarantee that a third party, in this case, when the party is transferred from Caltrans to, if it's proposed San Diego Habitat Conservancy, how do you propose that we retain the rights to build a trail? Not the obligation, not the funding to build a trail, but making sure that the rights aren't precluded by a new property owner. So what we're proposing is that access easement, which will be granted to SANDAG, allows us, SANDAG, to say a trail will be allowed in this property. Location to be determined, you know, the funding for it to be determined, design to be determined, but the right that trail could occur. Then we want to work with the County of San Diego. We want to work with the Habitat Conservancy, if that comes to fruition, and figure out where's the best place to locate that trail, given the sensitive resources on the property. And then work with whoever, in this case, proposed the County of San Diego on the design, the planning, and ultimately the environmental clearance of that trail. At that point in time, if we can find funding together, then that funding can go forward, build the trail, and the access easement we granted the County of San Diego. That's the plan. And we'd like to hear from you tonight about that plan as well.
I do have one follow-up question, if I may.
Mhm.
And it's for Don Scholes, and I would like to know why he was not willing to include public access via trails, because he does have a proposal to open the property for public education. And it would seem to me public access via trails would be a perfect fit for that public education.
In the RFP, trails were not included, and really our only included items that were asked for in the RFP, and funding is not included for trails, and that is why we didn't include trails in our proposal. We certainly are really looking forward to bringing people to the site to share, you know, the unique place that Rancho Lilac is, and to have an experience on the land. But that may be different, you know, in partnership with various community groups. That's different than a truly public trail, if that makes sense. So we're not opposing trails, but it's not our decision to make whether a trail is installed or not, and nor are we funded to do so.
So Don mentioned the RFP. The RFP was kind of silent on trails. And I think that's what he's responding back. The proposal said they would work with the Valley Center Community Trail Center Community Group to determine where the trail should occur on the property or could occur on the property. but their proposal did not include funding for trail maintenance or development. Kim?
Okay, our next question comes from Charles. Oh. Charles, I think you have to unmute yourself and you can speak.
Hi, Charles.
There you are. Hi, my name is Charles Richmond, and I am a real estate attorney. And the issue I see that we have here is that the Conservancy has no money to fund. And from what I heard from the gentleman from the county, he says that they guess they have to have an incentive with the mitigation to go ahead and agree to come up with the money to build the trails. And moreover, the other issue is that if it's not done within 5 years, then the public, at least from what I can tell, may never get trails on that property.
So I think right now the trails have to be figured out in the larger context of the Valley Center Community Plan. The map that was just on the screen that we showed last, that's an illustrative example where trails could go, but not necessarily will go out there. You can see there's even a gap in the middle of that map that kind of, for some reason, didn't go through. So the idea of the 5 years, and it doesn't have to be 5, it could be 3, it could be 7. It was an arbitrary number that was picked out to give time for the County of San Diego to figure out how this property fits in with the larger context of the community and where the locations of off-site trails could occur. I think there's some no-brainers out there. A trail along what's called the Mesa Verde Trail or Lilac Road that goes north and south, that's kind of a no-brainer. We can all figure that part out. I think the one that goes east-west along what's known as Keys Creek, that's a little bit more a planning exercise. And I think the county has good planners to determine that. And I think it should be done in the context of the larger Valley Center Community Plan, which will have public input and will have public involvement. But regarding funding will still be an issue, whether it's this trail, where the County of San Diego takes it on with this proposal or not. There's still an issue about funding, who pays for funding of trails. Kim?
Okay, the next person is Hutchison's.
Yeah, my name is Steve Hutchison. I should mention that I'm on the Valley Center Community Planning Group, although I'm not speaking on behalf of that group. I also chair the Community Plan Update Subcommittee for the planning group. I understand that you guys have been throwing that around a little bit during your earlier discussions. Sorry I wasn't present to help you with that. My fundamental question, I guess, is why the county's proposal has not been given more consideration. It seems to me that Rancho Lilac is a very important community asset as well as a regional asset. I live just over the hill from Rancho Lilac. I've ridden my horse on the trails there. I've sought to buy cattle from the cattle operation there. It's an important part of Valley Center. In order to provide the community, the public, with the many benefits that Rancho Lilac can offer, I think it sounds to me from what I've heard this evening that the best option is the county ownership of the property and management of the property, because then we eliminate this whole discussion about who can fund the trails, who can build the trails, who will manage the trails. It would be a settled issue. And I realize the RFP was put out many years ago, but again, being so close to Rancho Lilac, I don't recall ever being reached or queried about what I thought ought to happen to that ranch. I think it's a very important piece of property, and I'm wondering if you can explain to me why the county wasn't involved quite a bit earlier, and why trails weren't. It's hard to believe that a property 902 acres situated where it is, given the circumstances in San Diego County, especially in Valley Center for parkland. I mean, Valley Center is well underrepresented for parkland, that trails and public access would be so limited under the San Diego Habitat Conservancy option. I know that they've included education, but apparently from the last statement about that, it would be on an organizational basis, probably more limited, certainly not public at large. And I don't think that's satisfactory for Valley Center.
Well, thank you for your work on the Valley Center Community Plan update. That should be an exciting process. And I do agree that the Rancho Lilac property is really unique out there in terms of the location, the resources that are on the property, and it's just a wonderful piece of property. Regards to the RFP process, I mean, that's a fundamental thing we should kind of talk about. So when the SANDAG went, Caltrans purchased the property in 2011, as Kim mentioned, and we went specifically to the County of San Diego, the California Department of Fish and Game, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. All those are big land managers. They're all wonderful land managers, and they've all managed lots of property. And at that time we said, you know, would you take this property on? Caltrans, while is really good at transportation planning, they're not good at long-term land management for natural resources. And at that time, none of them were interested because it was too far away from their holdings, their actual holdings at the time. Nothing's changed. I get that. But SANDAG went through in 2014, where our board sent out an RFP. We went through a contractual process to say, please give us your proposals based upon our requirements for the management of this property. We got 3 bids back. The top bidder, the one that we chose to work with, was the San Diego Habitat Conservancy. And everything leading up to this point in time has been, how do we bring something to the board of directors that both conserves the properties while maintaining as much of the area as open to the areas as possible. The county's proposal, and it's a cost estimate, it's actually a full proposal. They're wonderful property managers. I highly like and enjoy working with them, but it came outside that process, outside that RFP process. So while the board of directors is understanding all that, and all this information will go to the board of directors, we have to understand that there's a contractual process with the RFP, and then there's this proposal outside the RFP. So that may not be a satisfactory answer, but that's the situation we're in right now. With regards to trails and why it wasn't trails included, frankly, as part of the RFP process, we were probably maybe too focused in on the net benefit provision of why the property was acquired. Protect those biological resources, protect the wildlife corridors. And that's where the RFP was drafted and written with Caltrans and SANDAG jointly, and went out to the public, went out to the marketplace for that. Hindsight being 2020, we probably would have added more public access component in there. That said, you heard the San Diego Habitat Conservancy has said that they would like to work with the Valley Center Trails community to figure out where trails could be accommodated. If that comes to fruition, I think the access easement would just give us the additional rights to say, let's work together and figure out where this trail should go. So again, the board of directors will take this issue up in an open session later on in November or December. And obviously you'll be providing feedback to them, and as well as all the input that we hear tonight. Thank you. Kim?
Okay, next up is Frank Landis.
Hi, Frank.
Hi, hey Keith. Yeah, I usually represent the California Native Plant Society, but I'm speaking on just on behalf of myself. I think I actually support the process that I've been outlined, and I'm just a little concerned that a lot of the comments I'm hearing are very, very focused, possibly overly focused on trails. What's there's 2 issues here. One is, what is the trail running through? I mean, if you just, I have to deal with a lot of stuff as a park volunteer, and mostly it's unauthorized trails that are gator backing the areas that used to be beautiful, but now there's so many trails that they're getting trashed, and we have to actively deal with it. And you never want to see that happen to a park, but when you hear people asking for more and more and more access, that's always a concern, and that's a huge management concern. But the other thing is just sort of the proper management of the land. I mean, you've got cultural resources, you've got historical resources, you've got natural resources, probably more than just what's in the MSCP. It looks like you got trees that could do carbon sequestration. You probably got a watershed. Those are all things that are enormously valuable to the county, especially since the county needs space, needs things to do sequester carbon and preserve nature. And I'll point out even that the Governor Newsom on October 7th started a whole ball rolling with his executive order this is to try and preserve more biodiversity. So I'm a little concerned with these comments about saying that they want only trails when there's so many resources in Lilac Ranch and they all have to be managed properly. So that would be my comment. Thank you for taking it.
Thanks. Just to follow up on that, I think we all know that there's opportunities out there for identification first of what the resources are. Where are the biological resources that are concerned? Where's the historic? Where's the cultural? And whether it's the San Diego Habitat Conservancy or another entity, they would go through the same process, which is to first identify those resources. And those resources get identified of which ones are critical for conservation and which areas are less sensitive. And that's where the habitat management plan comes into play of how you manage those resources, given potential access out there. And what my understanding of going forward is the habitat management plan will get the identification of a potential trail system out there with input of the county and stakeholders. And that's what we want to do. We want to have people work together on potentially conserving the resources, but also potentially access out there. Thank you. Kim?
Okay, our next question's from Donna.
Hi, my question had to do with the timeline, and I think you just answered part of it. The habitat management plan that you laid out before is an 18-month process that the Conservancy has to get a lot of information together. Has that process been started?
No, there's been no contract let yet. So once
Okay.
once a contract's undergone, we sign it, that's when the 18-month clock starts.
So when does the 5 years that the county has start? When that is complete or when they start that process?
Again, the 5 years is an arbitrary date, but it would start after the board of directors takes an action. There's no action taken yet by the board of directors. These are just proposals by staff to bring to the board.
Okay, so if you took the action on Friday to have the HMP started, then the 5-year clock would also start. And see, it sounds like it's a cap rather than an open-ended thing. So what happens if the county just says, we don't want to do this? Is there an option to bring someone else in to do the trails?
You know, that's a good question. So what we have proposed, at least generating this proposal, and I should mention both the conservation easement, the access agreement, and the exclusivity agreement will all be available before the open session. The action, the Friday board meeting is a closed session, so there's no action going to be taken. The open session later on in November or December, that's when the board will take some action and direct us. If they choose to offer a 5-year exclusivity agreement, and let's say through that process, the county of San Diego decides that this is not the right area for them to put a trail on, that access easement is transferable from SANDAG to another entity. I would like to see it go to the county of San Diego. It could go to the county of San Diego, but it doesn't have to. If another entity stood up and said, we want a trail on here, we're willing to do the work necessary, it's transferable. Thank you.
Okay, next is Julia F.
Hi, this is Julia Feliciano. I'm also on the Valley Center Community Planning Group, but I'm on this call strictly as a private citizen. It seems to me that, and first off, I do want to thank you for holding these webinars. It's very helpful, and we do appreciate it. But it seems to me that we're going to put, process over really, I guess, what would be best for the community. I understand there was this RFP process and that the Habitat Society was chosen, but it seems to me that some circumstances have changed in the interim, which is that the county is now interested in taking possession and working on the trails. And I think that's an opportunity that we should not lose. And I just hate to see that because things were done a few years ago a certain way, that we really can't go the way that would be the best thing for the community. And we all do care about preserving the habitat and the sensitive plants, animals, wildlife corridor, very important to me personally. The historical items, all of that, very, very important. But the Conservancy has a history of not allowing people onto property or limiting even the times that access can be made. And it just seems to me that we really do need to have public access to these trails. And I would really very much like to not have to drive to Escondido all the time to go hiking. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Yeah, we're hoping with the access easement that we'll retain that right that a trail can go on there. And all the details would have to be worked out over that 18-month period while the habitat management plan is being prepared. So thank you.
Okay, next up we have Bruce S.
Yeah, this is Bruce Salerno. I live here in Valley Center. And following up on what Julie just said, it seems that we are completely hung up on this RFP process. And I guess the question is, because we do have the county in the background who can jump in with funding to get the trails done and to manage the property and conserve everything, but we're getting hung up on this process. So the question is there any reason, any legal reason why you, who is going to recommend to the board that you cannot recommend to stop the process and go back out and do it over?
Yeah, Bruce, I'm not an attorney and you're starting getting quickly into contract law, which way outside my depth. I would probably just recommend that if that is a question, you can send an email to clerk of the board at sandag.org and ask your questions, legal in nature, and we can pass this along to our legal staff and our board of directors. So I just don't feel comfortable answering that from a legal standpoint, but thank you for your question.
Okay, next up is Pamela Heatherington.
Hello again. This is a much tamer edition of this Zoom call. Thank you for holding a subsequent one. The last two speakers, I guess, you know, we bought a house and the lady that we bought it from wanted to jump out of the contract at the last minute. You know, that just is not a legal area that I don't even think you want to entertain. But when the county did not submit a proposal to begin with, have they submitted one since then, Keith? Have you solicited a proposal from the county?
So solicited is a very loaded word as well. The County of San Diego has provided a fee estimate of what it would take to manage that property. It's not really fair to say that the county has submitted a proposal because there are lots of aspects of that was not provided to them in terms of the covenant of easement, in terms of historic properties, but they have provided a fee estimate of what it takes for the management of the property. I think Pam wants to drop back off. I guess we'll go next question, Kim.
Yes.
Follow-up questions we can get there.
That would be Susie Murphy.
Thank you so much. Hi, this is Susie Murphy. I'm the executive director of the San Diego Mountain Biking Association, and I also sit on the County Parks Advisory Committee, appointed by Supervisor Cox. And I just want to ask the pattern from what my research has turned up. I'm just wondering if does the San Diego Habitat Conservancy have any properties that have regular public access for multi-use, so hikers, equestrians, and cyclists, not just educational, private, organizational outings, but regular access like the county provides in other open spaces, you know, sunrise to sunset, basic access like that for multi-use. And if they do, can they describe their experience in this area and how they work with public access and balancing that and the conservation of the area? As the executive director of SDMBA, you know, we totally believe in the balance to try to take a property like this in an area that is lacking in trails and connectivity. We believe that this area needs to be run the way the county runs other open spaces. So I just want to know from the Conservancy if they have other properties that have regular public access.
Well, thanks, Susie. And I see Don has opened up his mic here and put his video on. Don, want to address that?
Yeah. Hi, Susie. We've spoken about the Bridges property in the past, is my familiarity with you. We have 11 properties out of the 31 that we currently manage that have trails either through them or immediately adjacent along their boundaries. It's not typically we don't manage trails. Usually those trails are managed by the underlying jurisdiction. And all of our coordination about the management of those trails is with that underlying jurisdiction. Does that make sense?
And Susie, let me add to that. That's the idea of adding an access easement over this. If there's a concern about not having or being precluding any kind of public access out there, the access easement would float with the property, be provided to SANDAG. So when the trail alignments are figured out in the future, then SANDAG would have, again, the right, but not the obligation to allow access to be put that property. Thank you, Don. Kim?
Okay, next up is Libby.
Hi there. Thank you for, as Pam said, having a subsequent session. I didn't come on for the second part last Thursday, so I appreciate this opportunity. And I came on late, so Keith, you may have addressed a couple of my questions. I think last week you said that the EMP funding is not available or would not be used for trail building. Is that correct?
No, I said the EMP funding can be used for biological acquisition for mitigation land, restoration, or land management. And
okay.
So it's just unclear. Land management is what we're talking about.
Okay. So, I mean, I interpret that as meaning that it wouldn't be used for building trails. Is that not a fair interpretation?
I think it's fair to say it's a gray area.
Okay. All right. And then just for everyone listening, I mean, Frank and Heather know this, but there's a large contingent of folks who are concerned about trails being on this property. And so I think that just needs to be said. Those folks who want trails on the property probably know that. You as a group are more vocal than those who are concerned more about the biological resources. But it is a concern. And given that the primary purpose of this property is to mitigate for the loss of habitat occupied by sensitive species, and that recreation has negative effects on biological resources, both flora and fauna, wildlife, that is the basis of our concerns. So I'm concerned to hear, I understand that SANDAG has come up with this, solution to deal with this impasse that we're at with the trail issue, and that is the floating easement. But I'm surprised to hear, or at least my perception is that SANDAG is not remaining neutral on the notion of trails on this property, but is in fact supportive of that. And I would think that at least until such time that the HMP is complete, that SANDAG would remain neutral. Can you address that?
Sure. I think you mentioned the HMP. From day one and from the RFP, we've always said the habitat management plan is required. And as part of the habitat management plan, that's where, again, you identify the resources that are off limits, need to be protected at all costs, those that are less sensitive, and frankly, those that are out there that really don't have any value. There's a lot of grazed land and a lot of old farmer agricultural land. So HMP is a really important step in the planning process for determining how you manage the property and where the resources are that you're trying to manage. As part of that, SANDAG can envision that an access could occur out there and not impact those resources. The where, the how, the what, all that is kind of in the future as part of the HMP. And what we're trying to do as part of this process is to allow the space and time for the contractor, for the County of San Diego, for the stakeholders to work together to allow and determine where the resources are, how the property should be managed, and where access could occur. What SANDAG's position is that we want to be able to retain the right to have an access easement out there or have an easement access out there. But that all needs to be done in the context of planning, and it should be planned where they don't impact, paramount, don't impact any resources, because that's why the property was acquired. And secondly, where does it make sense out there in terms of trail usage, in terms of access, in terms of connectivity off the property? So again, we don't have the answers today, but with the pathway, what we're proposing is the habitat management plan be that pathway. Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Lynn Turk.
Hi, Lynn. Lynn, we can't hear you, but it looks like you're unmuted yourself. So that's good. Yeah, I'm sorry, we still can't hear you, Lynn. Kim, why don't we come back to Lynn and go to the next speaker? And if Lynn can just raise her hand again, we can just jump her back.
Okay, the next up would be Wayne Spencer.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, Wayne, we can hear you.
Hi, Keith, good to see you. My name's Wayne Spencer. I'm a wildlife conservation biologist. I've been involved in conservation planning in San Diego County for nearly 30 years now. I'm calling as a concerned citizen primarily, but I'm very familiar with the location of this property and its resource values. It's important to wildlife connectivity, etc. Mainly, I am wondering why this hearing is necessary. I'm very confused, and I know I have not been a party to previous discussions, but I've heard a lot about it. There was an RFP process for a land manager to manage the resources on this property, a preserve area under the MSCP, et cetera, et cetera. There was a formal RFP process. A highly qualified team, the San Diego Habitat Conservancy, won as the most qualified entity. And they are to prepare a habitat management plan, which may or may not include trails. There is nothing in the contractual arrangements that I have heard of that preclude trails. I have not heard that the San Diego Habitat Conservancy is against trails. In fact, they want public access for educational opportunities, etc. But that was not the purpose of the RFP and the arrangement in the first place. So I'm very concerned as a citizen of this county that a legal RFP process run by the San Diego Association of Governments is now being derailed. You're right, Keith, that's a very messy place in contract law that I don't think you want to be in. And even legalities aside, it's a very important breach of public trust. You've got an entity that is eminently qualified, that applied and won a contractual arrangement, and now you're breaking that, or there is a proposal to break that arrangement for a reason that I don't understand. Again, there's nothing that precludes adding trails. They are currently not funded, whether it's through the county or through the San Diego Habitat Conservancy. It's a separate issue. The issue on the board is you have a land management entity that should go ahead with doing what the contract says they should do. And then whether it's in, well, it would be in concert with the local planning entities. If a trail is deemed reasonable and useful and not at odds with the resource values, that's something to be determined later. And I'm really confused why it's derailing a legal contractual process. And I haven't heard a reason for that.
Again, this process will go to the board of directors. The board of directors makes the decisions. The issue tonight really is we had a proposal on the May 22nd board meeting where we heard a lot of questions about turning the property over to a non-governmental entity, an NGO, and the potential to preclude future trails. I think that what we're proposing today, our proposal right now is that in addition to that conservation easement, in addition to that habitat management plan, SANDAG will retain or propose to retain an access easement to allow this time and space to occur for planning of the trail to occur in conjunction with the habitat management plan. In addition to that, there's that 5-year exclusivity agreement, which will allow the county to, give them an opportunity to look at the design, the planning, and environmental clearance. Again, all this information will go to the board, and anything that the public deems to send to the board, you can send to the clerk of the board at sandag.org, and we'll get to them. So thank you.
Did we want to go back and try Lynn Turk? Are you able to unmute your mic?
And I think you got cut off before. We can see your little mic that shows that you're not muted. Unfortunately, we just can't hear you.
Well, I'll go on to Kevin Smith.
Kevin, before we start, Lynn, let me suggest you just log out and log back in. Maybe that'll help resolve the issue. Kevin, I saw you. Please could you? So I think it was Kevin Smith was next.
Kevin Smith was next.
Keith, SANDAG production. We're not seeing a mic for Kevin Smith. He's been unmuted, but there's no mic.
Okay, let's go on. Kevin, if you can find a mic, please raise your hand back again.
We'll move on to Lori.
Hi, Lori. You can unmute your mic. There you go. Oops. All right. Well, no one Zoom bombed us. That's a good thing.
Okay, I'll move on to Dave Claycomb.
Here we go. Okay, I just unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, David. We can hear you.
Excellent. Hey, Keith. I'm one of the founding members of the San Diego Habitat Conservancy, so I've been involved with the organization for 20 years now. And just want to make a couple of statements representing the board, just so they're crystal clear. We do not oppose trails on Lilac Ranch, period. And I listened to the meeting, I guess it was earlier this week or late last week, I forget at this point. And even some commenters today are under the impression we oppose trails at Lilac Ranch, and that's simply not the case. So I want to make that crystal clear. We also haven't historically controlled access at any of our preserves or at Lilac Ranch. We currently have no land use authority at Lilac Ranch, and we don't restrict or control access at any of our other preserves. That is not our role. We manage the lands in accordance with the habitat management plan that applies to the property we oversee, which will be the same at Lilac Ranch. And also, we will not write and dictate the contents of that HMP. Of course, we'll prepare a draft working with the community, the resource agencies, the county, like I said, the community, the Trails Association, whoever's interested. At the end of the day, Caltrans and SANDAG, I believe, with input, will approve the contents of that HMP. Without trails is really not our decision. And finally, a number of commenters have suggested that we haven't been involved with the community leading up to this point. We'd love to be in the position to, start our public involvement program in accordance with our proposal. We're just not there yet. And we will immediately, as part of the HMP process, get involved with the public regarding all of the land use types at Lilac Ranch. And that's the end of my statement.
Thank you. And yeah, just to clarify, SANDAG and Caltrans has approval authority over the habitat management plan as proposed as a part of our contract. And since you brought up the process of the development of the HMP, Don, do you just want to stay just a minute, just explain how you propose to go about developing that HMP in terms of public outreach?
Yeah, we envision having a public scoping meeting or a workshop at the very beginning with the community to go into detail about what typically goes into the management plan, what the purpose and goals of a management plan are, but most importantly, to get the community's input on what they think we should be including in that management plan. And I envision that we'd probably be responding to those comments as to what should be included in the management plan. It's a little premature because we haven't started on it, but we would be responding to those comments during the time that we'd be preparing the draft HMP.
My understanding working on HMP is the first thing that has to happen too is after scoping is you need to have all those resources be evaluated. Biological.
Correct. I mean, yeah, I mean, immediately we'll be kind of hitting the ground doing our surveys and mapping the resources on site. And that will go hand in hand with that scoping process with the community as well during our draft period.
I see that Lori's back with her hand raised. She wasn't able to speak before. Can we promote Lori and have her speak? Lori, we still can't hear you.
I know.
Sorry, Lori. May I suggest you send an email to pio@sandag.org with your questions, and we can address it that way.
The next person on the list is Doug White.
Yeah, hello, that's Doug. Can you hear me?
Yes, Doug, we can hear you.
Great. Hey, yeah, I'm a property owner on Keys Creek Road. I'm east of the Rancho Lilac parcel. There's a question for Don. Who would be the contact from the SDHC if I make observations or if I have questions on things that are going
on? Currently, or if we are to take over management of the property?
Well, I guess both.
I can address that. Currently, Caltrans is, so we're not in place yet. And certainly we have fielded some calls about trespassers and that sort of thing, but Caltrans is the current owner and manager on the site. So we turn those type of comments over to them, and they address it, and respond accordingly. If we are to start management, we will have a ranch specific contact as well as people that will be on site. Either a caretaker or ranch manager, and we'll provide the local community that contact information for those kinds of inquiries.
Okay, if you and send an email to pio@sandag.org, we can go ahead and get you the contact for Caltrans, the property contact for Caltrans until a specific property manager is identified.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, next person is Gary Cannon.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now.
Yeah, we can hear you, Gary.
My concern with it is, and a couple of speakers have already brought it up, is that this is a mitigation site. It's not parkland, and the purpose is to mitigate impacts from the freeway widening. And if the county wants parkland, I think they should acquire parkland. One of my concerns with it being managed by county, and I assume county parks, is that it may not be simply those few trail easements, but over time with increased population and demands for more and more park facilities, the County Board of Supervisors may be pressured to expand the uses there. And again, the purpose of this is mitigation land for habitat. And so what controls does SANDAG have to assure that this always remains habitat land? So such as what controls? It's one thing to have trails, but then trails lead to dogs on the trails, mountain bike use and potentially other features. What control would SANDAG retain if land is transferred to the county?
So currently Caltrans owns the property, and Caltrans, before they transfer that title to anybody, a conservation easement will be placed over the property in favor of SANDAG. And a conservation easement basically outlines what can and cannot be built on the property and what resources and why it was purchased in the first place. Uses that impact those resources would not be consistent with the conservation easement. A habitat management plan is the next layer down from that conservation easement. The habitat management plan identifies where the resources specifically are and how they're to be managed. It's a very common used document. We sometimes call them habitat management plans. We sometimes call them resource management plans, but they're the same. It's basically where the resources are, how you're going to manage them, what goals you have in terms of goals and objectives, and how you accommodate all these uses on the property. And so SANDAG is not in a position to say trail is compatible, not compatible. I think all those we envision all those would be addressed as part of the habitat management plan. But on top of that habitat management plan is the conservation easement, which SANDAG has legal authorities to both, forget the legal term, but to enact that conservation goals on that plan. And again, I mentioned before, the habitat management plan would also have to be approved by Caltrans and SANDAG prior to it being implemented. Thank you for your question.
Okay, our next question is from Judith Shadzi.
Hi, Judith.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. I'm Judith Shadzi, and I'm a member of both the Trails Association and the Friends of the Hellhole Canyon. And we've had many fundraisers at, for the Friends of Hellhole Canyon over the last 5 years, and have really accomplished a lot with that. And I just want to say that I hope that Fred Woolman, the president of the Trails Association, and Joaquin Aganza could be advisors, and that because they're very experienced with the things that have gone on. And the Hellhole Canyon is very successful. It's not that busy, and there's no bikes or anything out there. It's being preserved very well. And if that could be used as a model for this area with just minimum trails, I think you could, learn a lot from them. It would be nice if they could be included as advisors. I was just wondering if that would be possible. Because the other thing is, there are dogs, like the only trails we really have to walk on now are right along Valley Center, which is quite dangerous sometimes. And there are dogs walking there, but they're always on a leash. And there can be rules when they make trails that could be just minimal, not to bother the natural resources in that area. But it would really be nice to have a somewhat flat area in mid-town that people could go just walk there. I wouldn't like to see bikes and different things that are gonna bother the wildlife myself.
Well, thank you for your comments. And again, we can pass along the idea of doing I guess as part of the development of the HMP, the idea of having public input is a very important process. And Don, if the HTAC is taking over the property, they have to have a public outreach process, which could include what you're proposing.
Okay, now we're going to kind of go back around. Pamela Heatherington.
Hi, I just have one quick request when you take things back to the board. I think it would be wise to involve a recreation ecologist. They study where activities should happen in sensitive habitats. And I think, this is turning out to be kind of a contentious issue. And I think that maybe having some expert advice like a recreation ecologist might be a benefit for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you for your input.
Okay, next would be Bruce S.
Keith, can you hear me?
I can, Bruce.
Good. I know that we're in this RFP process and the county's involvement is a little bit on the late side. And both the county and the Conservancy have experience in managing mitigation type properties that have areas that need to be preserved and taken care of. The difference between the two of them is that the county has money and the Conservancy doesn't. But what I'd like to do is re-ask my earlier question without the legal word in it. As I understand it, Keith, you and your team are making a recommendation to the board. Can you recommend anything other than moving forward with the Conservancy?
I think what we have outlined for you is a proposal that we'd like you to have your input on. We'll get direction beyond that from the board of what they'd like to see our proposal look like. So I know I'm dancing around your question, which is, are we going to recommend something different? And the answer is, I frankly don't know. This is what the public input process is about. We want to hear from you. We want to be able to refine our proposals to reflect an accommodation of what the community needs are, at the same time of preservation the property that for which reasons I was bought. So I'm not going to be able to address your answer specifically as you want to, but I think, again, you can send an email to clerk of the board at sandag.org with your questions, and they will all get to the SANDAG Board of Directors.
Okay. Before we scroll back to those who already asked questions, I missed some at the bottom. So the next would be Frederick Woolman.
Unmute. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the call. I think Pam's idea of a recreational ecologist is an absolutely outstanding one. I think one of the reasons that I personally and so many of us in Valley Center are concerned is that in 2017, I got a phone call from Mr. Scholes, and he mentioned that his organization had been selected to manage the property. And then he went on to tell me that there will be no trails on Rancho Lilac. And then in 2019, in a SANDAG conference room, that same comment was repeated. So I'm confused, okay? And the only reason we're having these public input meetings is because we made such a fuss about being excluded, from this process. If there are 11 properties that San Diego Habitat's been involved with that have trails or trail access, and they don't control access to their properties, I personally would like to know where those are, because the website, as I've seen the website, says very plainly there is no public access to trails. And I agree, the biological stuff is critical. It comes first. Trails are only done, if possible, where appropriate, where it doesn't impact, the habitat. But again, there's a huge trust issue here. There's a huge trust issue. And quite frankly, that's why myself and so many people would say, you know what, if I have to pick a partner to live with for the rest of my life and the rest of my kids and grandkids' lives, I think I'd rather pick the county than San Diego Habitat, because at least with the county, they've got some accountability. If I don't like what they're doing, I know who to complain to. If San Diego Habitat owns the property, and I'm sure they're good people, but I have no ability to complain if I don't like what's going on with the property. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. And I actually want to address this head on. In a second, I'm going to ask Don to address the issue of access and how he envisions access out there, just to clear up the issue of whether SDHC would allow access or how it would allow access. But in the meantime, I just wanted to mention with regards to the future properties, that's where SANDAG would come involved in the review of the habitat management plan. If there's something out there the habitat management plan is not accommodating, I have a SANDAG board. The board of directors can be brought to, the issue can be brought to them as a non-agendized item, and we can definitely have a second chance to talk about these issues when there is more detail as part of the HMP. Don, will you just address this issue head on about access?
Sure. So I did want to go back, Fred. When we've spoken in the past, I had stated that trails were not included in the project, and that's the way the project was presented to us to bid on in the RFP. I thought I had done a good job of trying to explain that trails could be built by others in the future, but funding was not included in the project that we bid on. And that's still the case. That's what was been talked about tonight. But somehow that's been turned into that San Diego Habitat Conservancy are the bad guys, and we're not providing trails. Trails were never included in the proposal because the trails have never been included in the RFP for the property. But we're neutral on trails, and certainly, in our HMP, we're going to be identifying the constraints of habitat and historic and cultural resources, and identifying the areas of lesser quality of those resources where other things could be done. But again, that would be performed by others and funded by others. Regarding our trails on the in and around the preserves that we manage, we look at it like we do not allow the public on our preserves. The preserves are just the habitat, and those ones that do have trails, technically, once at the edge of the trail, that is somebody else's ownership and management responsibility. So that's the way that works. Certainly the trails are an important part of those preserves where they're located. We like it's an easy way for us to bring people out to the site and to have educational activities, scientific activities, other outreach events with the public. So we do like trails where they are located, but again, that is not our primary focus or goal. We're habitat managers, but we incorporate trails into the overall management of our preserves for the mutual benefit of both parties, both types of land users.
Thank you, Don, for clearing that up. And again, this we're right now at 7:32. How do we go another 15 minutes? We have a couple more hands raised. I'd like to address those questions. Thank you for your patience. Again, this was being recorded, and that copy of that recordation or that video will be available to you after the meeting.
Okay, our next person is Christina Schaefer.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Christina, we can hear you.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify a few things about the habitat management and answer some questions that were posed, because that is a very, very valid issue. And thanks, Keith, for explaining the habitat management plan so well. So I am a landscape ecologist, and I'm that recreational ecologist that has been mentioned a few times, and I will be involved in the writing of the habitat management plan. And for the person that is with the Friends of Hollenberg Canyon, I also was involved in writing that habitat management plan for the county. So there is a lot to be said for balance. And to speak quickly to the issue of land management and public access, there are different purposes for land conservation and land management. Some lands are strictly conserved for the management of natural resources and biological resources, and it is so identified in the conservation easement. And the habitat management plans get attached to the conservation easement and become legally binding to the conservation easement. So if a property is conserved through a mitigation process that has, for example, a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biological opinion that says very clearly in there, thou shalt not access this property, then this goes with the conservation easement and with the habitat management plan, and therefore there's no access to the property. This is not the case for Rancho Lilac. The Rancho Lilac habitat management plan will be written as an adaptive management plan, meaning that it will be adapted to the conditions at time with scientific data available, with information about the natural resources. We will do baseline biological surveys first so that we can use science and intellect to balance natural resources, biological resources, cultural resources and public access to this property. So yes, public access will be a component of this habitat management plan. And it is honestly, it doesn't matter whether the county manages it or the San Diego Habitat Conservancy manages it. It's going to be the same type of requirements on this property. It's the the San Diego Habitat Conservancy is certified by Cal Fish and Wildlife and accredited to manage lands. And that's why the Habitat Conservancy has the unique skill and was selected by SANDAG as such to manage this property. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Cameron Izzati.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can, Cameron.
Very good. Thanks. As stated, my name is Cameron Izzati. I'm on the board of directors for the Friends of the Hellhole Canyon Open Space Preserve. I'm not the first to speak. I just want to echo what Judith said earlier. I think that our combination of conservation and public access through the trails that we have at the Hellhole Canyon Open Space Preserve has worked very well. And I think that it's functioned in a way that's enabled people to interact with the natural resources that are present at the preserve there without degrading them in any way. We don't really see a ton of bike activity. It's primarily pedestrian and equestrian in nature. I think that further to that interaction, we've had success adding to the conservation. Again, balancing that public access versus and conservation is important. And I think that that's something that's apparent in this plan. And on a personal note, I mean, having grown up in Valley Center myself since 1994, I've seen the same changes impact our town that everyone else has seen. And that's why I got involved in Conservancy here locally. I think that if the past has shown us anything, it's the change will absolutely come, and it will come sooner than we expect. So tying public access directly into the preservation of our open spaces will help us control how this change occurs. I think we'll be able to preserve our town's rustic aesthetic, the flora and the fauna as noted earlier in the area, and it'll allow our community to connect with the land for decades to come. So establishing that positive feedback loop, I think that continues to sow appreciation and concern for the natural resources that we have in our community. So I personally supportive of the trails here in this plan.
Thank you, Cameron. I think a common theme was there, as if I understand the last speaker correctly, is the habitat management plan for both Hellhole Canyon included an adaptive management approach. And I think that's what's being proposed here as part of Rancho Lilac. So I think there's a common theme between those.
Okay, our next speaker is Janice Shackleford.
Hi, Janice.
Hello. I feel the RFP was flawed to begin with. When the Conservancy develops the HMP, they said it would be feasible. They would develop it as its feasibility with the Valley Center Trails Association. Well, feasibility can easily be no trails. And so I am in Lakeside. We had a project here that is totally fenced off because it went to another habitat NGO conservancy, and we had trails designed for it across it, and they are no longer linkages and we're basically stuck. The flaw in this case is that there is no funding for a trail. And I assume that public dollars are being expended here. I don't know why that the public funds cannot provide for trails on this property, as well as habitat management and conservation. So, thank you.
Again, that's a good comment to address to our board Again, it's clerk of the board at sandag.org. With regards to the habitat management, the difference I think on this property is, I'm not sure that other property in Lakeside, but this one would have SANDAG and Caltrans final approval of the HMP. And if, as proposed, at least what staff's coming up with, is it would also have an access easement on top of it, which would be a legally binding ability to put an access trail through that property. And that's the difference, I think, between the Lakeside property you're describing and this one.
Okay, our next question is Hutchison's.
Look, you turn off the mic and then turn it back on again. Here you go.
Am I on now?
You are.
Okay. I just wanted to touch again on the RFP issue. The previous callers had talked about this as being a flawed process because it didn't include trails in the initial development of the RFP. I've done a lot of government contracting at the federal level, and I understand how RFPs work at that level. Maybe it's different with the county or SANDAG, but it seems to me that since the RFP has a flaw in that it wasn't considering the importance of trails to the community, that given that there's no contract awarded, that the process can be redirected and started over again without any particular difficulty. Until a contract is awarded, and I understood you to say that it hadn't been, we should be able to rework the requirements of the RFP so that it does address trails and does do it in a way that isn't perhaps as complicated as having the county with an easement and the Habitat Conservancy with ownership of the property worrying about what the county is doing on the property. It's just a little bit more complicated than having one entity responsible for the whole project. And I would urge the staff, since you're going to be making the recommendation, to advise the board that, yeah, we want to take another look at the requirements of the RFP and include consideration for trails in a more simplified way than having dueling entities worried about where the trails are going to be and how they're going to be managed. Thank you.
Thank you for your input.
Okay, the next question would be Donna.
Hello, I wanted to know if Debbie Mosey from the San Diego County Park and Rec is still available. I've got a question for her. There's been a couple of comments regarding habitat and conservation, and I do know that the county has a lot of preserves all over the place that they do this with, that they protect the habitat, and the trail use is minimal and people stay on the trails and it doesn't affect the habitat. But I'd really like to hear her take on that. Is she still available?
Deb is available. Deb, would you address that?
I am, yes. Thank you for the question. Yeah, so to clarify, the county Department of Parks and Recreation, it is confusing. There's a kind of a belief that our focus is on the recreation and active park, but we're actually a dual mission department. And as you pointed out, we have a lot of preserved land. So we have about 53,000 acres of land, of which about 40,000 acres are preserved land. Not every single preserve that we have is open to the public, but we do have a lot of our preserved land is open to the public where appropriate. About a large majority of our land is in the South County MSCP, which means the Multiple Species Conservation Program. So we have a requirement to the state and federal government to ensure that we're meeting certain conservation goals. If we don't, we are held accountable by the state and the federal government. And we have been meeting all of our conservation goals in all of our South County MSCP. And because we are committed to conservation, we do buy land outside of that area in North and East County areas. And in anticipation of potentially getting an MSCP in those areas, but if we don't, we're still continuing to buy land in North and East County. We have trails in our preserves that are typically a lot more narrow. We don't have very large trails in our preserves, and we do site them in a way where there's minimal impact to the minimal or no impact to the resources. And we do have a very robust monitoring program. It's actually above and beyond what San Diego Management and Monitoring Program is doing. We meet a higher standard than that with our MSCP for South County. So we monitor for species and habitat in all of our South County preserves, but we also have extended our monitoring in some of our North County preserves. And this is all under my team, and we're working to continue to bring more North County preserves into our monitoring program, which is above and beyond what we're required to do by the state. So I appreciate that comment because I do think that there's misinformation. We have, like any land manager, have some illegal access that will happen and trespassing, and our rangers, which we have about 200 people, rangers and field staff, are constantly working to close down trails and or any area, and we do active restoration. We have about $10 million worth of restoration projects ongoing, and we've applied for about another $15 million worth of restoration projects. So we're always working to ensure that conservation is above and beyond what we're required to do.
Thank you, Deb. Appreciate that. We're going to take the last two questions and then close it up for this evening so staff can go get some dinner.
Okay, the next up will be Libby and then Pam.
Libby, if you could unmute your mic.
Okay, there we go. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you again. Yeah, well, I have a lot to say in response to Deborah Mosley's comments, but I think I'll leave that for now. I just would say, you know, as the I guess the mountain biking folks that I've talked to, not lately, but I've had some long conversations with a few of them, and they always request that we would understand their needs. So I'm just going to say to, you know, all those of you who really want to have trails on Rancho Lilac, number one, I'm not opposed to trails per se, but we do have a very serious issue in this county, and it's not unique to this county by any means, of mis-siting of trail, inappropriate siting of trails, inadequate management of trail use, inadequate management of recreation, and I'm not just talking about unauthorized uses. I would encourage anyone who cares about the resources, not just from the perspective of being able to recreate on them, to read some of the papers from Recreation Ecology, because it's really eye-opening, it's very saddening. I think if any of you have talked to wardens and rangers about what they observed during the closures of some of these reserves during the coronavirus lockdown, it's pretty amazing what they've observed. I was at Torrey Pine State Reserve last weekend, and I spoke to a ranger there, and he said it was really, really amazing what happened when people weren't on the trails. The coastal California gnatcatcher, which is a listed bird species, expanded its territory way, way beyond what the rangers had ever seen there. And as soon as people started coming back on the trails, they contracted their territories. So please don't anybody think that our presence on the land doesn't affect the wildlife. It does.
Thank you for your comments, Lee. Again, if we'll take the one more question from Pam, and if you didn't get your question answered tonight, you can send your questions over to pio@sandag.org, or if you'd like to address the board directly, please send an email to clerk of the board@sandag.org. So after Pam's question, I'll just have a concluding remark and we'll wrap it up for the evening. You're on, Pam.
Okay, wasn't sure which Pam. I do have a comment question. Dave Clayco, I believe, said that they do not restrict or control access. And going right along to what Libby said, and what Deb Mosley said about having 200 rangers, and what will be done to protect the property. I do understand there is some trespassing going on multiple times a week currently. And what is San Diego Habitat for Conservancy's plan to control trespassers and ensure that the biological sensitive areas are not trampled?
Don, would you like to address that?
Yeah. And Dave, I'm sorry, I'm going to speak for you a little bit. We do control access to our preserve areas. We do not control access to public trails. I think was the distinction there that needs to be made. In case, we would control the areas that are off limits to the public via fencing and signage, as well as also we will have a regular presence, if not full-time, 24-hour presence on site. And that staff will act very much like as a ranger or patrol person, but we'll have that constant presence to address any trespassing type issues.
Thank you, Don.
Thanks.
And thank all of you for staying with us for this last almost 2 hours now. We appreciate your patience. We appreciate your input. All this will be captured again, and the video will be available later. What we have here, all your email contacts. What we do at SANDAG is we send out what we call e-blast, their notifications. When a open session item for this item will come up, we'll make sure that we send out an e-blast to you, informing you of when that open session is. Again, the board of directors is taking a closed session this Friday. Your comments can be provided then via email to clerkoftheboard@sandag.org, or you can actually call in and provide public comments via live telephone. So with that, again, thank you very much. Kim, thank you. Don, thank you. And Deb for staying the entire 2 hours. And with that, I'm just going to close the meeting up. And thank you all. Give you.
Thank you.